in East Asia. I mean, do you really think if you're an ally of the United States that you can depend on us in the crunch? Do you really think that the United States is ruled by leaders who have good strategic judgment or just good judgment at all? I think the answer is no. I think just looking at what the United States is doing today, it's hard to believe what's happened to this country and where President Trump is leading us. And this is going to have huge consequences for us meaning the United States, in terms of our ability to project power around the world and to influence other countries, whether we are attempting to deter them or contain them, or whether we're attempting to woo them onto our side.
The Iran war is forcing the United States to move air defense systems, military units, and critical weapons away from East Asia and into the Middle East. That weakens America's ability to contain China while placing enormous economic pressure on allies such as Japan and South Korea. Those countries are not only watching Washington redirect military resources, they are also suffering from the energy disruption created by the war. So, is Trump's confrontation with Iran unintentionally helping China become more powerful in Asia?
And it's not only the Iranians, what about the Chinese and the Russians? We have three great powers in the system: the United States, China, and Russia. And China and Russia look like responsible stakeholders. Does the United States look like a responsible stakeholder? It certainly does not. Now, people, or I should say leaders around the world, are very careful about criticizing the United States too much because the United States is so powerful, and President Trump, acts with a vengeance when he's crossed. So people go to great lengths, leaders go to great lengths not to provoke him. But you can rest assured that in private, those leaders think that he is positively dangerous. We're in a situation where our allies probably fear him more than our adversaries do. And this is a disastrous situation. As I say, it's going to have disastrous consequences for our ability to project power all over the world. If you're a global power, to put it in slightly different terms, if you're a superpower interested in projecting military might into East Asia, into the Middle East, and into Europe, and it's essential that you have allies, that you have good relations with those allies, that you have international institutions, formidable international institutions, and you pay heed to those institutions and the rules that attend them, and that you pay attention to international law. This is the way we have behaved almost forever, right? We wrote the international law, we wrote the rules that underpin the institutions, and we wrote them in ways that favored us, and we by and large obeyed those rules and obeyed those laws because it was in our national interest. And we had allies, and we treated those allies well because it was in our national interest. Along comes President Trump, the ultimate unilateralist on the planet, and he's interested in trashing international law, trashing international institutions, and treating allies as bad, if not worse, than adversaries. And the end result of this is we're in a whale of a lot of trouble.
The United States is now demanding that European and Asian allies help enforce a blockade that Washington itself has been unable to make decisive, but adding several allied ships will not solve the central military problem. If the most powerful navy in the world cannot force Iran to surrender or permanently reopen the Strait of Hormuz, smaller allied contributions will not change the outcome. Instead, Trump's demands are creating resentment among the same countries America needs to compete with China and maintain influence around the world. So what happens when Washington starts treating its allies as if they are the enemy?
It's the logic that you just described is a logic that applies not just to Taiwan, but to Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. As I said before, it's not simply a question of whether the United States will be there for you. And here you want to remember we are pivoting away from Asia. So there is reason to doubt whether the United States will be there for you. But there's also the question of whether you can trust American judgment. Do you think this is a country that operates in sophisticated ways when it comes to formulating and executing military strategy? And I think almost all the evidence at this point in time is that it does not. It's not a very responsible ally. And the question then is, what do you do? What do you do if you're Taiwan and you're highly vulnerable? Um, and, we haven't talked about this, but what about nuclear weapons? If you're Japan and you're South Korea, how do you think about depending on the American nuclear umbrella? I mean, if you're a South Korean, not only do you have to worry about nuclear weapons in the context of China, but you have to worry about nuclear weapons in the context of North Korea. And you depend on the United States for nuclear deterrence. The American nuclear shield is over your head. Well, when you see what's happening in the Middle East and that we're pivoting away from Asia, if you're South Korea, I think what happens is that you begin to think seriously about getting your own nuclear deterrent. And I'm sure that same logic applies to Japan. So it's not only Taiwan that's beginning to hedge here. And given where we're at, and given the fact that, given where we're at in the Middle East, and given that we have no solution on the horizon to the Iran war, you really wonder where things are going to go in East Asia. The United States under President Trump is pivoting away from Europe. The Europeans want to be joined at the hip with us. They love us. They want to keep the American security umbrella over their head. They want to keep NATO intact. They have no animus against the United States. But President Trump has a deep-seated animus against the Europeans. He loathes NATO. And as you know, he's been in power for about 15 months now, and he's done enormous damage to the alliance. And the question you have to ask yourself is what's going to happen in the remaining 2 years and 9 months of his presidency. And it seems pretty clear to me that he's going to do a lot more damage, and that what's left of NATO, assuming he lasts for all 4 years, is going to be enormous. The damage he's going to do to NATO over those total 4 years will be enormous. I don't see how it will be otherwise. And in the process, the Europeans are slowly but steadily figuring out that they have to come up with an alternative security architecture in Europe. They cannot depend on the United States anymore. They cannot depend on the American pacifier because President Trump is so hostile to Europe. So things are changing in fundamental ways. See, the difference between East Asia and Europe is we need the South Koreans and the Japanese to help contain China. We need those allies very much. But in Europe, there's no Soviet Union. There's no real Russian threat. I mean, people can talk about the Russian threat, but there's no great Russian threat. So it's easy for President Trump to slap around the Europeans and to talk about ending NATO and pulling American forces out of Europe, or at least greatly reducing the American military footprint in Europe. He can do that because there's no Soviet Union. There's no equivalent of the Chinese threat. There's Russia, and Russia's having a devil of a time conquering the eastern 1/5 of Ukraine. The idea that it's a threat to reach the beaches at Dunkirk is a laughable argument. So Trump can treat the Europeans with contempt, which he's been doing, and that's going to fundamentally alter the relationship across the Atlantic Ocean in ways that are hard to imagine for people like you and me, who grew up during the Cold War and in the unipolar moment when transatlantic relations were actually excellent.
This loss of confidence could have consequences far beyond the Middle East. Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines all depend in different ways on American military power in Asia. but they are watching the United States struggle against Iran, a country with far fewer resources than China. They are also watching Washington remove military assets from their region and consume weapons that would be needed in a larger conflict. So, after seeing America reach the limits of its power against Iran, can Asian allies still trust Washington to defend them against China?
Well, I think there are two sets of forces that are pushing Trump in opposite directions. One are the Israelis, and here we're talking about the lobby as well as Israel itself. And the Israelis and the lobby do not want any kind of agreement with Iran, unless Iran throws up its hands and basically surrenders. That's one side. On the other side, there's the international economy. And the international economy is in terrible shape. And we are, as I say, on the Titanic heading for the iceberg. And you can rest assured that President Trump is under tremendous pressure from leaders all over the world to put an end to this. And President Trump himself, I'm sure, is surrounded by advisors who fully understand that we are on the Titanic. So the question is, will President Trump at some point before the Titanic hits the iceberg pull back and tell the Israelis that they're out of luck and that we don't care what they want us to do? We're cutting a deal because it's not only in our own interest, it's in the interest of every country around the world. And in that story, Israel loses and the rest of us win. Or is he so beholden to the lobby and to Israel? And all the evidence up to now is that he is incredibly beholden to Israel and the lobby. But the question is, will that continue? And will we, because of Israel, hit the iceberg? And that's how I see this playing out.
And how do you define in this context hitting the iceberg? What does that look like? How does it manifest?
I think that the economic damage is so great that we have a global depression that's as bad, if not worse, than what happened in the late 1920s.
That's an iceberg. That's a big one. And there's a lot more people on the ship.
Yeah. And by the way, Danny, there are lots of economists who make the argument that if you don't shut this one down soon, that's what will happen. And there are many people who believe that even if you shut it down soon, if you shut it down tomorrow, there's still going to be a huge amount of damage in the international economy. And it's not just gas and oil, it's also all the fertilizer and what that means for planting crops and for the availability of food moving forward. I mean, the potential for disaster here is enormous. Again, this is why President Trump, not the Iranians, wanted the Islamabad meetings. You want to think about the Islamabad meetings. The basic forces that were at play on President Trump were the same two forces I just described to you. Trump wanted the meeting in Islamabad because he understood he is the captain of the Titanic and the iceberg is not too far away. However, the Israelis and the lobby then weighed in and told him he can't cut a deal where we lose, that he has to play hardball in Islamabad. And then if the Iranians don't surrender, he has to put a blockade or do something like that to coerce the Iranians into surrendering. Those are the two forces that were at play before Islamabad, and they're at play again. And as we move forward, the interesting question, it's an immensely consequential question, is whether or not Trump is going to have the good sense to tell the Israelis to take a hike and put an end to this war, and then immediately go to enormous lengths to try and fix the international economy as much as possible, so we have as soft a landing as possible. It's not going to be a soft landing, but as soft a landing as possible is what we want.
And that may become the most important consequence of this entire war. America entered the conflict believing that overwhelming military power would force Iran to accept Washington's demands. Instead, Iran survived, the Strait of Hormuz became more dangerous, and American allies began questioning Washington's judgment. China benefits when American weapons and military units are pulled away from Asia. Russia benefits when Washington becomes isolated from Europe. Iran benefits when the United States damages its own alliances while failing to achieve victory. This is how global power can shift without America being defeated in a single decisive battle. The United States may still possess the strongest military in the world, but a superpower cannot remain dominant when its allies no longer trust it. Its weapons are being consumed in unwinnable wars, and its enemies benefit from every decision it makes. Trump may believe that the Iran war is demonstrating American strength, but the longer it continues, the more it reveals the limits of American power.